every year they run these Gallup studies on job satisfaction. Every year they come back deplorable, more deplorable than the last year, more deplorable than 10 years ago. People aren't finding it heady. Nobody's got job satisfaction. But the reality is that most people down deep hate their job or just really, really don't like it or feel like it is mundane because they're stuck in the paradigm of seeking satisfaction. Significance is something we can bring to our work and we can discover in our work when we actually come to understand that our significance is found in greater purpose, something bigger, kingdom values, work done to the glory of God for the good of others.
Welcome, everybody, to FaithWorks Lancaster, conversations on calling. I got to be honest, I immediately regret the length of the name of this podcast because we're going to be saying it very often. If you're listening this week, we're about to dive into how to find deeper satisfaction in your work that lasts. So if that interests you, you should stick around. If it doesn't, that's sad. It should interest you. Stick around and listen to the rest of this episode. Because your job is, yes, be converted. Because your job is more than a paycheck. But before we get there, just a few things. Make sure to subscribe. I like to break the fourth wall on podcasts all the time. So what I will be saying right now is that I hope our social media and YouTube is up by the time you're listening to this episode. That's it. So make sure to find us at FaithWorks Lanc. You can follow us and follow us anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also check us out at our website, faithworkslanc.org as well. Again, we hope all of those things are running by the time you're listening to this. If not, then worse things happen and you're probably not listening to this episode.
That's the key here. We're trying to talk about the future. It's going to be the past for everybody else. But anyway, yeah, finite and limited. Anyway, here we are. So we mentioned in our introductory episode that this podcast is really a listening tour. We want to hear from others how they understand, how they talk about, how they engage the relationship between Christian faith and work. And so in this episode, we're going to do just that.
Yep. And our guest today is well known, at least to some of us on here, and is the great and awesome John Pletcher, who, by the way, John, I'm assuming it's okay that I just keep referencing you as Pletch the rest of this episode because
Love it.
It's gonna be hard for me not to. Yeah. John, welcome, man. I'm gonna give you a quick introduction here, but for those joining,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, for those joining us, John, I interned with John a long time ago. He had a I was less gray back then. And,
both of us were less gray, and I had more hair. So, but then I had you as an intern, and it
went. Yeah,
Josh as an intern. Yep,
he stole it from you.
For those of you who don't know John, just a quick breakdown of John. John is lead pastor at Manor Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for 17 years. Has it really been 17 years? Pletch, that you've been at Manor? Wow.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Time
I
goes
know.
by.
It does. It does.
On top of that, though, John has authored 6 books on mission and faith, formation at work, including we're going to be talking about in this episode, Henry's Glory and Henry's Christmas. I'm sure will come up some as well. But John has also served as adjunct faculty at the Denver Seminary. He's written multiple times for the Institution for Faith, Work, and Economics. And on top of that, married to his wonderful wife, Nancy, with 3 adult children. One of them, I believe we might have figured out, lives near me. It's a whole thing. But yeah, beyond that, John was a fantastic pastor and person I interned with for not that long, really, honestly, but it was a great experience, a very formational experience. So I thank you for that, John.
Loved having you as an intern. It was great.
But very quickly, John, knowing you, it was clear you were interested in faith and work. So before we jump into any of the questions that we originally had, I want to just know a little bit more. Talk to the audience here. What got you interested in faith and work? Obviously, you're a pastor, so part of that makes it clear maybe what got interested in faith. But you were very passionate about this even when I was an intern back at Manor much longer than several years ago now. At this point, I'm getting older. But what got you into it? What got you interested in this topic?
So I was working on my doctorate, and a whole lot of my doctorate out at Denver Seminary had to do with a deep dive on faith formation and vibrant missional living. And in the midst of that deep dive, I started to catch a passion for realizing there needed to be some way to help people see everyday, ordinary ways that they could actually integrate their own spiritual formation and their own vibrant gospel witness in everyday life, beyond just your normal prescribed boxes of church ministry. And so that led toward me doing even further research toward the end of my doctorate that moved into my thesis dissertation related to this. And so that was a spark like that. But it was also very, very personal. I had a dad who, amazing dad. He's in glory now with Jesus, but he lived most of his life really feeling unfulfilled. He lived this kind of torn, stretched life. He was really good at working on cars. He was crazy good at working on cars. And he crazy loved Jesus, like in great, great ways. But he consistently viewed those as separate things in his life. And so he was really, really great at working on cars, and he really loved serving Jesus in church life, but he viewed them as separate. And so he was constantly thinking he should be doing more spiritually. He was constantly going on witnessing escapades with people that he viewed as something higher than his work on cars. And as an adult and as a pastor, I started to see this and felt my dad's level of frustration on that. So those two things, work on my doctorate as well as my own upbringing with a dad who was work torn like that, really, really motivated me to lean in on this topic. And then just a realization that in my own local church life, people, they spend the bulk of their hours on their job. That's where they spend the bulk of their life. And so I started to get passionate about what's it mean to bring faith to work every day, and what's it mean to think about business as mission in everyday life.
Yeah, that's John. That's really helpful, and the personal connection honestly leads me into understanding a little bit more too about and I remember this when I was interning these conversations, but the book and how we got to Henry's Glory, and that discussion. But obviously, one of the things that's interesting about Henry's Glory, the book that you wrote, and I remember this sticking out to me when I was an intern at Manor in the conversation, because I'd already been very, very interested in this topic. I think even coming into Manor, which was somebody had gotten me somewhere books on this topic already in undergrad, and so it had interested me, and also thinking about how people, like you said, the majority of their day is at work. And I think that often is missed in the conversation when we're talking about the value and what God's plan is and what God is doing. But you decided to talk about it in an interesting way. Your book Henry's Glory, without spoiling things, you use story, so you decided to talk about exploring finding that significance in your daily work, but you decided to do it through a story instead of an explanation or kind of breaking it down, a normal type of book. And so without spoiling it, what drove you to tell this story, and why? What were you trying to help readers see differently in this book, Henry's Glory, than maybe some others?
Well, with the help of my lead consultant on my research work, he helped me realize that I really ought to package this in such a way that it wouldn't just be another seminar, another workshop, another info download. I mean, dissertations and theses, when it comes to a delivery mechanism, usually are built off of that framework. And originally we set out to do that. And I had put like gazillions of hours into the research on this. And so there's major theology backing all this up. There's major research backing all this up. There's all kinds of other theory and practice backing up what went into this little book. But in the process, started to realize, wait a minute, really want to deliver this in a way that will capture attention, spark fresh imagination, a fresh, holy imagination for how our daily work can actually be transformed and can be redemptive and help people catch some holy imaginations, some fresh perspectives, some paradigm shifts on that, and started to realize, wait a minute. I remember the other day, I just had this epiphany. It's like, wait a minute. A lot of what the theology behind this is the story of God and the mission of God and God's grand story. So let's tell it as a story and let's weave in family characters. And so even though I don't blatantly say it in this story, one of the characters is my dad from my own history. And one of the characters is my own son who was thinking about becoming an architect. And so, which he has gone on to do. He's an architect in Chicago today, but years ago wrote this story, kind of, pitching it out there that this young man goes on to become an architect. And so a lot of it came out of my own family history. Someday, 20, 30, 40 years from now, people are going to read this book and be like, wait, which parts of this are truly Pletcher family history, and which parts are mythologized? I have this conversation with my mom recently about this, and she's like, yeah, people are going to be confused, but it's okay. It's all right. So, yeah. So yes, Josh, a lot of this comes out of family history, but also my own passion for story. But it's even more than that. It grows out of this just all out love for the story of God and the fact that it's the grand meta narrative that actually inspires and drives our own daily work. And I think it's G.K. Chesterton who at one point said, there's God's grand story, and we find our place in all our little stories in the grand story. I'm kind of paraphrasing Chesterton there, but that was the essence of what he said.
I like the story component of it, like the without getting too far into that moment for now, but just the way at the end of the day, the average person connecting to it, they're going to connect to it through the story element, how they fit into God's story, into that picture and what that looks like, not necessarily the 12 bullet points of theologically how this fits. And I like all of that stuff. It's the reason I ended up in academia in former fashion, right? You have to maybe be a little bit rewired to like that to get there. But the story component, that's really cool. It's this idea of that, like it's going to connect better with that and the emotions of like really where people are coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And the story itself weaves in characters from a bunch of different work-life backgrounds. So everything from an architect to an older guy in the story who turns wrenches. He's a grease guy, turns wrenches on things, to doctors and others. There's a vet in the story, a veterinarian and stuff like that. So just kind of weaves in a variety of different places.
That's a great segue to the next question I want to ask, because one of the things that that Josh and I have observed and that we're trying to investigate a little bit further is that, the wider faith and work movement, which Josh and I have a lot of respect for, and we think there's been a lot of incredible work done from many different domains, whether it's kind of the more theological end, the pastoral, the entrepreneurial, whatever it may be. But one of the potential audiences of the faith and work movement that seems to be missed in many of these conversations are those kind of blue collar, no collar wrench turners, and that has some relevance to our particular kind of regional context that we have as well, right? So John, you are a local pastor here in Lancaster County, longtime local pastor. You have, I'm sure, congregants who come from all different kinds of walks of life and professional circumstances, vocational realities. So as you just think over your years of pastoring in the area and living here, what is the region's spiritual heritage, which is, as we know, is heavily Anabaptist, not exclusively so, but that's an important component that I think we wouldn't want to ignore in this conversation. Even just the manufacturing history, the agricultural background to the region too, and the strong work ethic that exists here in the county, in the
Right.
region, all that. How do you think those things shape how people think about work for better and for worse?
Yeah, well, from the better part, the work ethic piece is phenomenally biblical, proverbial. I mean, we know from a biblical vantage point that uh, the Lord Himself is pro work. I mean,
Mm,
the bulk of Jesus' parables are work oriented, business oriented, and so the matchup from a biblical values vantage point that's a big plus. That's a big pro. One of the things I see that actually becomes this very interesting faith work intersection for us in this region actually flows in the opposite direction. And what I mean by that is like actually helping people understand the importance of Sabbath, actually
Mm,
helping people understand how Christ meets them and brings them rest. I mean, the stuff of Matthew 11, take my yoke
mm,
upon you, learn of me. I'm humble and gentle in spirit. You'll find rest for your souls. I find these days both people long term in Lancaster County, as well as the massive influx of new people into the area and into our own church, massive influx of people, um, not necessarily with those Anabaptist roots,
mm,
people all over the board needing a biblical perspective on the rhythm of good, hard, salt of the earth, um, proverbs, work like the ant, dig in, go for it.
mhm,
The balance of that with the importance of soul care, the importance of rest, what it really means for somebody to care about how I do abide in Christ, how
mm,
I find rest in Christ, how I find my yes, my significance and my soul nurture in the person of Christ, and I find my own personhood, not my own identity, not in what my title is, but in who I am in Christ, and then how those intersect in everyday life. Um, so I find it interesting that the things that are really really positive also have a shadow side to them within our current Lancaster County culture. And
yeah.
I think when I interact with people in a variety of different places, there are many pockets around the U.S. and frankly around the globe that share very similar issues where there's this deep rooted, grinded out work ethic, and that's good. But the need for Christ oriented Shabbat infusion of soul care.
mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just to follow up on that too, thinking about it, having a healthy, because that strong work ethic, which is
Mhm.
has been historically particularly prominent within Protestantism generally, not to say the
Yes.
exclusion of other Christian faith
Mhm.
traditions, and other religious traditions too, but it's been particularly strong. But you can imagine how that heavy emphasis on hard work,
Mhm.
productivity, if we have an unhealthy view, like kind of as you were describing with your dad,
Mhm.
between your worship on Sunday and your work on Monday,
Mhm.
if you don't
Mhm.
see the work on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday as worshipful, as contributing to that, it could actually accelerate or increase that problem, right? Where it's
Oh,
your strong
absolutely.
work ethic, and you gotta do all these things because what's going on Monday through Friday doesn't contribute to the same ends of what Sunday does. If you have that misperception, right, of that,
Absolutely.
then it can be really unhealthy. So there's a sense in which perhaps an antidote to workaholism for the Christian, at least part of this. There are other matters going on there, but part of it can be understanding the relationship between Sunday and Monday, right? Closing that
Yeah,
Sunday to Monday gap.
absolutely, Eric. And so that's where one of the huge paradigm shifts that I try to work with people in one-on-one counseling as well as in my preaching and teaching ministry. And then this bleeds through big time in Henry's Glory and Henry's Christmas is this paradigm shift, this perspective shift from compartmentalizing life, living. I like to tease people and call it pie life, where it's a pie and we segment it, you know, and And so here's my work life, and here's my entertainment life, and here's my church life, and here's my personal devotional life, and we tend to think about life that way. But to move from pie life, compartmentalized, or even we might call it disintegrated life, toward integration, where faith and work, business and mission really go together as a life of worship, And so it's very interesting in Genesis 2, some of the lingo for work the garden, when the original humans are placed there and told that they're placed there to work the garden. It's the same little Hebrew word that shows up for serve and worship. Work, serve, worship ends up being this interchangeable translation all across the rest of the story. And the rest of the biblical story, it shows up that way. So work, serve, worship. So what you were saying right there, Eric, that whole piece of viewing not just Sunday as a time of worship, but Monday to Saturday as a full life of worship. Well, then that has big implications for those rhythms of hard work and rest, productivity, and pulling back and slowing down and rejuvenating and letting Christ do that in my life. So
and
but compartmentalizing versus integrating, that's a great big shift.
Right. And as you're saying this too, I'm just thinking about even seeing the purpose of Sabbath rest as it relates to the rest of the week. We could just see it as I'm dog tired from my week. I just need a breather, right? But that's not a full picture of biblical rest, right? But to recognize that even that necessary rest is not just from the labors of the last week and all the troubles and the trials, but it's also preparation for our act of worship through the coming week as well. It's integrated, even whatever our worship.
Even that it becomes integrated then. Absolutely. Yeah.
And Eric, to your point, like when work is something separate, well, now all of a sudden work is something separate. I also need to though make sure I'm serving in the church enough, because if I'm not doing that, and I'm only focusing on work, I'm missing these pieces, and all of those things matter, but they're all integrated together in a way that God doesn't see them as separate avenues of domains of your life.
Yeah. And honestly, that was I mentioned my dad, love my dad, much of my own faith today is a result of my dad. But this slice in his life of a disintegrated life, where he really couldn't see how his amazing work he could do on cars and trucks and buses and any vehicle. I mean, he could practically speak to one and make it run. It felt like that to me, because I didn't know nothing about that, but Dad could make anything work. But he couldn't see that as having actual significance for the kingdom of God. He struggled to see that, and so therefore he lived this constantly frustrated life because it was disintegrated. He viewed what could happen on Sunday or what could happen on visitation on Tuesday night with other deacons in the church or something like that as that had kingdom. That was kingdom value. And you just did the other in order to make a paycheck and give your tithes and offerings to the church. So
yeah, and that jumps well into kind of the next area we wanted to go, which is we kind of talked about this idea of like you've had a lot of conversations with people between the book to what you're doing as a pastor, right? And one of the things you mentioned, I like the terminology that you reference, which is finding kind of this lasting significance of your daily work. Or even as you and I were talking in a coffee shop prepping for this stuff, talking about it's not really even finding, it's uncovering what's already there. It's something that it's there whether you realize it's there or not. And so I'm curious, what do you say to someone who's thinking that way, thinking in kind of like a pie segmented life, or is looking at work and going, thinking it's mundane, repetitive, they don't see how it fits into God's picture? What have you found most helpful to start talking with about those people and kind of starting that conversation? What would you say to someone who's seeing things from that way to start to go down a different way of thinking?
No, that's a great question, Josh. One of the things we try to do is dig into the essence of significance versus satisfaction. Often when it comes to jobs and work life and business, we we mistakenly use those terms interchangeably, but
Okay.
they're actually not. They're not actually not. Satisfaction and significance. Um, every year they run these Gallup studies on job satisfaction. Every year they come back deplorable, more deplorable than the last year, more deplorable than 10 years ago. People aren't finding it heady. Nobody's got job satisfaction. But the reality is that most people down deep hate their job, or just really, really don't like it, or feel like it is mundane, because they're stuck in the paradigm of seeking satisfaction. Significance is something we can bring to our work, and we can discover in our work when we actually come to understand that our significance is found in greater purpose, something bigger, kingdom values, work done to the glory of God for the good of others. When we recognize that our significance is found in reflecting the image of God and fulfilling some of those very primal divine calling opportunities, that initial blessed to be a blessing kind of aspect, the stuff of the call to Abraham, of the stuff, frankly, of Genesis 1 and the Imago Dei, and then the thread of the Missio Dei across the grand story. When we realize that our actual daily work has an enormous role in all of that, well, then suddenly the significance changes. It's not about me feeling satisfied. It's not about, hey, do you feel like you're really great at this? Or are you getting a lot of applause over this? Which is at the core of job satisfaction. And there's no doubt about it. We all like some applause. We all like it, when we get praised for being a great intern, which Josh was like one of my favorite, if not my favorite intern. Josh, I'll just say it right here. You were my favorite intern.
Well, my job satisfaction just went up. It was great.
Did it just? I mean, it just went through the roof, didn't it? See,
yeah.
But the reality is, let's just play with that for a minute. The reality is, you had moments. I know it. I know it because this is the way it works on a job. But you had moments as an intern when that was not your favorite thing to be doing, and you felt less than satisfied. But the real difference maker, and this is true in my role, even as a pastor, there are plenty of days that I don't feel job satisfied, but I can bring a fresh significance in the character of Jesus, in the perspective of I'm here to bring glory to God and serve others. I'm here to fulfill the mission of God. I'm here to fulfill reflecting the image of God in what I do. And so when that's the case, then somebody can turn wrenches. Somebody can take people's blood pressure. I was to my annual physical last week, and I was so grateful for the team that taking care of me, and what that brings God glory. That's part of kingdom work. And so I try constantly to just help people reframe. It's not about satisfaction, it's about significance. And that wrapped up in some of the things I just rattled off there about biblical significance and stuff. There's whole just truckloads of research and background on that, theologically and practically. Those are just a couple of the highlights about how we bring significance.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Beyond all the nice things you said, which is great. I'll pay you later. But it resonates with me because it's how I was viewing my work of just like, yes, there were even interning, right? There were moments of like, okay, this isn't going great, or this isn't what I was looking for, or feedback from a sermon, whatever you wanted. But it was looking at these things of like looking for, okay, satisfaction in that I'm always feeling like I'm doing a good job at what I'm doing and missing. Yeah. I eventually started to learn, okay, you're not gonna have that every day. That's not a reality of what we're dealing with. And it's also not the purpose of why we're doing things. It's not to feel good in the purpose. The purpose is we have significance in what we're doing. And I'm curious, John, for you, if you found this helpful in the conversations, because for me, what was so changing in my perspective was just learning more about who God was beyond like my basic understanding of God, like learning the character of God, learning what God is doing. Because I think we look at God as just kind of, he sits up there, okay, created these things. And so that's often why creative types of stuff is easily, we can see maybe the significance connection.
Yeah.
Or God speaks and he gives to us. So the upfront talking stuff, the music stuff, yeah, we can see that significance, how it connects. But understanding also that God is a God of order, God is a God who's created all of these things, God is a God who structures, repairs, rebuilds. Like that understanding of who God is changed my understanding of my own daily work. So I'm curious, do you find also understanding God more helps people start to understand how their passions, their work connects into what God is doing? That God's significance is more than just saying, preaching, and singing and creativity. That
Yeah.
there's all those things are great, but there's more to God than that, right?
Absolutely, Josh. You are so right on the right set of train tracks there. I mean, we readily miss the fact that in Genesis 1, we encounter a creative God who, yes, he speaks, but he also scoops up dirt to form people. So he gets his hands messy right out of the gate. He plants people into a garden. He plants the garden, and then all of the story as it unfolds. God is constantly up to other things besides the stuff we normally readily label as, oh, well, that's divine work. You know, we'll readily migrate toward a Michelangelo kind of stuff in the Sistine Chapel as, oh, well, that's glorious, that's grand, and we readily skip over the fact that even ultimately, when God comes in a body here on earth, he spends the first 30 years working a trade, working with his hands. And that gets a little bit of attention in the text, but we readily forget that is a great big part of his story. The main stuff that we that we read about in the Gospels are the approximately 3 years of his word and miracle working, and then all of his wondrous atoning work for us through the cross and the empty grave. But the incarnation itself involved all of this stretch of him, God here in a body as the tektone, the worker, and that term tektone, by the way, we readily port in our modern day English as simply carpenter, but it really probably is more like handyman, potentially sculptor, and working with all different clays, possibly metalwork, possibly, I mean, it was sort of a tradesman for all things that he and his father Joseph did. And just realizing that God in a body, the stuff of the incarnation was him coming into those kinds of labors. We had a lot of fun here at Manor this past fall. I decided it had been a couple years since I try to run teaching and preaching on faith at work and business as mission in cycles here. And I realized it had been a couple of years. And so we did a series this fall simply called Work Like Jesus. That was the title of the series, Work Like Jesus. And we spent a good amount of time talking about the implications of his incarnational life as a tektone and what that ought to mean in our own lives about the high value. If God here in a body spent the bulk of his time here doing that, and we've only got a glimpse into approximately 3 years of the other, it's maybe that should say something significant to us about how significant all our daily hands-on work can be.
And to a point you made earlier, John, as well, even though the text gives relatively little attention to that in detail, it's the substance of his parables. Like he's working with that. And who knows to what extent he saw as necessary those 30 years of working at it so that he could relate and engage, and use parables that would us finite humans
Absolutely.
could grasp and understand, because it related to our lives.
Absolutely, Eric. Just this morning in my Lent Bible reading plan is Matthew. I'm doing the Matthew Lent plan this year, and I was in Matthew 25 this morning. Matthew 25, parable of the household servants with the talents, and I again was like, oh my goodness. Well, we forget there's a reason Jesus knew how to tell that story.
Yeah.
He had probably run across somebody in business who had had this experience and was like, oh, I'm going to tell that one.
Yes, exactly. That's a good one.
He doesn't name the characters, but I'm going to tell this one. Oh boy, oh boy. And some in the crowd were probably like, oh, I remember that one. I know the business guy he's telling about. Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So as you think about, or as you think about this and what your congregation needs, and attend to this in cycles, as you're mentioning, and those realities of distinguishing between satisfaction and significance, and maybe we might even say finding your satisfaction in the significance of what you're doing.
That's good, Eric.
And even as you think about connecting it to the mission of God, like, as I'll say, for me, not to make this about me or go in my story too much, I can pretty much mark my life between before Eric had a grasp of the mission of God and since Eric has begun to get a grasp of the mission of God, and how that's just changed my attitude to work. I can imagine that as as your congregation changes over the years and you go through these cycles where you give attention to faith and work, this must be like mind-blowing for some folks, and it must be almost so confusing to the point that they can't figure it out, right? Because we have even in the region, a subculture, some of the things we talked about earlier, that really kind of encourages that sacred secular divide, that our whole conversation has really been about breaking that down, right? So in your pastoral work, as you're preaching, teaching these series, as you're doing counseling and all that, what kinds of questions or struggles are you hearing from people as it relates to their jobs or their careers, or perhaps even in the context where you're sharing this illuminating perspective on the integration of faith and work that's revelatory for them?
No, that's fabulous question. So some of it is a whole bunch of it comes down to helping people, trying to spotlight the ways in which work crises, suffering at work, tribulations, relational difficulties, anything that feels work challenging, trying to help people see that that's not simply something to endure, not simply something to bear up under, but that it's actually something that Jesus can use to form them more into his likeness for the sake of others. So trying to help people think about how that at work challenge and the person who's just pushing all their buttons is just driving them crazy, how God can actually use that to form them, to shape them, and using that as a talking point for what spiritual formation really means. I love years ago, Eugene Peterson in his little book, Living the Resurrection, or Living Everyday Resurrection, I think it is. He said, I'm prepared to contend that the workplace is the primary realm for spiritual formation. I'm prepared to contend, this is Eugene Peterson, I'm prepared to contend that the workplace is the primary place for spiritual formation, primary realm. Love that from Peterson, because it helps reframe the significance your workplace can have. So whether it's the best sales week of your life or the worst performance week of your life at work, you're able to enter into something Jesus wants to do in you and through you there. So helping people in the midst of suffering, that's a big piece of it. And tribulations and relationship difficulties, all of that. Even low performance times for people when they're like, oh man, my feet are to the fire. If I don't get this together, I'm going to be kicked to the curb by a boss. Like helping them understand, all right here, Christ's dependence, abide even more, watch for fruitfulness flowing out of your relationship with Jesus. Some of those kinds of things become very practical counsel and enrichment things, but it requires that all of us get to know people enough closely enough, love on people enough to love them in their workplaces. So like all of us who are in ministry leadership in any capacity, whether guys and gals are a pastor like me, or whether we're leaders on a leadership team out in our church, or leaders in different ministry areas in our churches, just getting to know and help people see the integration that can be right there. One other thing I find really big, besides that kind of counsel, besides that kind of preaching, is just honestly making a great big deal of encouraging people in their daily work, just like pouring on encouragement, like understanding that all of us, our level of encouragement is always diminishing. It's always like encouragement leaks out. It just does. And so for all of us to try to be bucket fillers constantly with other people, to say thank you constantly. Thank you. I mean, the guy who works on my 2 old cars, I thank him all the time. I'm like, dude, you bless me. You bless my cars. You bless my life. My life is different because you're an incredible mechanic, and he smiles and laughs. And like, I'd expect you to say that. You wrote the book, John. I know, because he's read Henry's Glory. So he's like, no, but I'm like, no, Andy, I'm serious, man. Thank you. And when I catch him when he's done work on somebody else's car, I know I try to praise him. But it's not just that. It's I have a PA, a physician's assistant, who literally saved my life. She caught something years ago when I was in for a common cold. She caught something on my vitals, sent me for blood work, literally probably saved my life. I was back in 2003. Wow. And I turned around and just profusely thanked her and said, you know what, God used you. I didn't use kingdom lingo with her that day, but in the weeks to come, I had opportunity to reflect a lot of gratitude and a lot of encouragement to her. And so I think that's another piece of this, is just watching for how to pour in encouragement, because encouragement leaks, and workers in every field imaginable need that.
Yeah. Wow. So you have me thinking down another line of thought here that I hadn't considered quite this way before. But everybody busy in their workplaces, struggle. So many of us struggling to figure out how best to engage evangelistically or pre-evangelistically, with coworkers, even if we're in non-Christian or diverse workplaces, having this beautiful vision of what work is, not just our work as believers in Christ, but everyone's work, every good endeavor, as Tim Keller said, right?
Yes,
regardless of your own faith commitment, you're doing the work of God in sustaining, the creation and the created order, right? We're all doing that. We're all image bearers, right? And so, but by those of us who are Christ followers, acknowledging that, even with folks who we don't know where they're at in a relationship with Christ, or the lack thereof, can be used by the Spirit, right? And it's certainly encouraging to other individuals.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's actually, that's one of those important principles of starting with the gospel in Genesis 1, not overly quickly jumping to Genesis 3. And, we're so good at doing that. We jump to Genesis 3, the sin, the curse, that's why you need saved. And that's true. But wow, and you guys know this, you're both nodding your heads. You know what I'm talking about. Actually starting by acknowledging, and more than simply lip service, but actually spending time encouraging others in what they are already doing that reflects the image of God as image bearers, and thanking them profusely for their role in the grand story, without even using that kind of churchy lingo, but just saying, wow, amazing. This is amazing that you know how to do that. I mean, that is very, very cool. Thank you. I often think about this. Every so often, I will catch on Thursday mornings is garbage day in our neighborhood. And every so often I will catch the garbage guys, and I'll deliberately shout and say, yo, thank you so much. They look at me like, dude, you're not supposed to have that much energy at 5:30 in the morning.
It's just trash, right?
It's just trash, dude. I pick it up every day. But
that's that guy probably doesn't even live in this house. I don't know who this guy is.
Exactly. but that's the point. The point
Yeah.
is we so readily relegate those things as low, and the stuff like some of the rest of us do as somehow higher. And it's like, no, wait a minute. But you're right, Eric. That is all part of winsome witness. That is all part of, particularly in our current culture, that's part of helping connect the dots for people and showing them the good news, the original good news, and starting right there with image bearers and applauding that, because that's all part of how people reflect that.
I'm curious, as we're ending and kind of thinking about this whole conversation, from your perspective, why does it matter for reaching the people who need this most to hear about their vocation, that this comes at it from an accessible way, a different way? Not necessarily, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the big theological books or anything like that, but why is it important to come at it from an angle that's not that space for the people who need it the most?
Well, a couple things come to mind. One is profoundly and theologically recognizing that really does that delivering rich concepts and rich theology through the lens of story in its own way reflects God's own pattern. The bulk of biblical text really is narrative. It really is story. So from cover to cover, oh sure, there are all the different genre embedded within the story, the grand story itself, but it is a grand story. And so that realization, Jesus' own teaching, preaching style. You were busting on me earlier, Josh, for saying, well, this is kind of quintessential Pletcher anyway, because that's the story. Thank you. That's a compliment. I take that compliment.
Yeah, I meant it as a compliment.
I receive it that way. But honestly, at the risk of sounding overly Jesus-y about it, it was Jesus' own pattern to deliver rich truths through the delivery mechanism of story. And so and then I just got to be honest, it was fun to be creative and sneaky along the way. I've had people who've actually said that to me. They've read it and been like, oh, it's actually really sneaky. Like that paragraph right there. That's like a whole chapter from Keller, like got in that paragraph of the story. And I'll be like, yes, all right, awesome. So that's fun. But then honestly, a big part of it, the very first test case group, when I was running the research part to finish my doctorate, and they were reading the story, the original test case version of Henry's Glory. I drew 15 people together, and they were from all different work fields. Had a guy sitting there who's in metal fabrication. I had a math teacher sitting there. Had a medical doctor sitting there. And I just marched around the room, remembering the different ones who were in on the test case group. And the wonderful thing for me was listening to a couple guys in the group who were definitely more of those salt of the earth, like turn the wrench, bend the metal kinds of guys, say to me, I enjoyed it. I got it. Oh, wow. And then the best was some of them admitted to me that was the first book they had read in like 20 years. And these were guys in the group were like, I read it. Hey, when it's about trucks and cars and animals and hey, I'm like, so anyway, just the realization that something like this can hit hearts and minds and can potentially shift paradigms for people, hit hearts and minds, grab imaginations, switch up paradigms. At the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. To the glory of God, for the sake of others. And then even just to watch a number of people whose own antenna radar went up in their workplaces about being more vibrant witnesses there in their workplace, more fully integrated, thinking about their witness as more than simply handing somebody a gospel tract, but actually thinking about what it means to love people well to the glory of God, what it means to deliver excellence in their daily work to the glory of God, so as to potentially pique curiosity and cause people to ask, why would you do that? That's amazing, so.
John, one of the things I love about your approach too is, and because I love it because it resonates with one of the things that Josh and I have talked about previously, and we even mentioned earlier here in this episode, just the some of the challenge within the faith and work movement to actually speak to people in certain professional contexts, particular tiers. Again, maybe you're blue collar, no collar, something like that.
Yep.
A lot of if you're a knowledge worker and you're an entrepreneur or something like that, like there's lots of resources out there for you that maybe aren't the academic theology ones. Those are still kind of, you have to be in a special place to receive those well. But even some of this other stuff, like killer's work, for instance. But then there are also those folks who may struggle to see themselves in even what's presented in some of those kinds of works. So this approach that you're taking is almost kind of the parable approach in a way, and I think is really helpful for those who may struggle to see themselves, even though they are there. I mean, again, every good endeavor, all this work does map to the mission of God, to our work as image bearers, etc. But helping folks kind of connect the dots, I think is really key, and it's something that we're hoping to do even through this effort. I really appreciate you helping us think through that.
No, that's awesome. I love you guys' heart with what you're doing here. What you're doing here with this is a good endeavor, guys. It's great, really good.
Thanks, John. Well, John, thanks for joining, man. Wherever you release, you will at least be known as the first guest on FaithWorks Lancaster Conversation and Calling. Thank you for joining and being a part of this. For those listening, if you want to check out John's book or other books, there's plenty of other books we have not talked about in this episode. We'll link to some of that in our episode page on our website at faithworkslanc.org. That will definitely be running by the time this episode releases. Thank you, John, for joining us, man. This was great. Seriously.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Really good. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.